Welcome everyone to the 10-Minute University Noontime Chat. For those of you not familiar, 10-Minute University is the trademark for short classes, videos, and handouts on essential gardening information for the home gardener. Oregon State University owns a trademark, and Clackamas County Master Gardeners developed the program. Today's talk is part of our 2021 series. You can find the recording and other 10-Minute University resources at cmastergardeners.org. Here is a short list of handouts from our 10-Minute University. These handouts that you see here will help in today's presentation. Once again, please go to cmastergardeners.org for all the information on growing blueberries that you see here. Oregon State University also has two very, very good publications. One is called Growing Blueberries in the Home Garden, and the other one is called Growing Blueberries on the Oregon Coast. Even though that one does say growing on the Oregon coast, it is still applicable for the Willamette Valley and other areas in Oregon. Both of these publications were updated in 2020 so that you know the information is very current. As we begin this presentation today, this is a list of the things that I hope you get out of it. I hope that you will be able to choose the correct variety of blueberries for what you want, learn the proper planting techniques and soil improvement, learn proper care for the plants, including fertilizing, watering, and pruning, and we will also talk a little bit about some of the possible pest problems and the solutions for them. Now, if you take care of your blueberry plant and you follow the directions that I'm going to give you today, and you are growing a northern high bush blueberry, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, your blueberry plant should have dark green foliage, produce about 10 to 12 inch branch growth a year. That means during the summertime when the branches are growing, they should grow about 10 or 12 inches long. You should, on a mature bush, have between 10 to 15 pounds of berries per bush, and these bushes live 50 years or longer if they are taken care of. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is pick what site you want for your blueberries. Like I mentioned, these blueberries are going to live many decades, so you're going to want to make sure that they are in the right place to begin with. Full sun is very important. The more sun a blueberry gets, the more sun any berry gets, the sweeter the berry is going to be. Even though they will tolerate partial shade, you will get a poorer yield. Your fruit quality won't be very good. You won't get as many, and they won't taste as good. They also need to be in fertile, well-drained soils. They're very sensitive to wet and heavy soils, and I will talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. Now, soil pH is probably one of the most important factors when growing blueberries. Blueberries need an acidic soil, about 4.5 to 5.5. And because of that, it's very important that you get your soil tested before you plant your blueberries. Now, I know some of you probably already have blueberries in and you didn't get your soil tested, and maybe it's not quite right. That can be fixed a little bit. If you get your soil pH tested and you find that it's above 5.7, you can apply elemental sulfur, and the directions will be on the package. But if you find that it's only a little bit above, like 5.5 to 5.7, you won't need sulfur, because the fertilizer that you're going to be using on your blueberries will help to lower the pH. They are going to be acid-loving fertilizers. Planting in an area that has poor drainage can lead to root problems and root death. Your water table should be at least 14 inches below the surface. And if it isn't, then you can put your blueberries on, either put them in raised beds, or you can just mound up the soil, make them in raised mounds on the soil. Now, when I say it needs to be at least 14 inches below the soil surface, what you're going to want to do is dig down a hole, fill it with water, check about 2 or 3 hours later, and see where the water level is in that planting hole. Organic matter. Okay, remember I said that you need fertile, well-drained soil. So adding organic matter is probably the best way to get it. Blueberries grow best when the soil has a high organic matter, about 4%. Now, if you're not sure and you really do want to check to see what your organic matter is, you can send a soil sample into soil laboratories, and they will test and tell you how much organic matter is in your soil. You need to choose an organic matter that is low in pH. So that means sawdust or bark, either from Doug fir or pine or most hardwoods. Be careful if you're using walnut, especially black walnut, because the tannins in the leaves and the branches and the bark may raise the pH, and it also might inhibit the growth of your blueberry plants. Try to avoid fresh cedar and redwood, especially on your young plants. They're not going to grow very well in that. Also, and this is what gets people a lot, is avoid manures and compost. Most of the time, manure and compost are high in pH. So that means you don't want a high pH, you want a low pH. They are also high in salts, and blueberries are one of those plants that just cannot take high salt. So no manures, no compost. Now, we're very lucky in the Willamette Valley that we grow northern high bush blueberries. Now, the list that you see on the right of the screen is a list of blueberries that are recommended by Oregon State University, and they are listed in order of ripening. Of course, those are not the only ones. There are a lot more. Blueberries come in early, mid, and late season varieties. That means if you planted some early ones, such as a Duke, and a mid-season, maybe like a Blue Crop, and a late season like a Chandler or an Elliott, you could actually be harvesting blueberries from mid-June clear through mid-September. That's a lot of blueberries, and that makes for a nice summertime supply of blueberries. OSU has a catalog. If you go into their catalog, the extension catalog website, you will see one of their publications called Blueberry Cultivars for the Pacific Northwest. This publication will give you information on the specific cultivars that you might be looking for. It'll give you information about the berry size and whether it's disease resistant, also how big the yield is. It'll also tell you whether a certain blueberry plant is good for commercial use or good for home gardens. So it's a very good publication if you have not purchased your blueberry plants yet. Now, many of you may live in areas that you just don't have room for a high bush blueberry, the northern high bush, which can, if you let it, reach 9 feet tall or even taller. And maybe some of you want to grow in containers. So to do that, it's recommended that you use what is called a half-high blueberry. Now, a half-high blueberry is a cross between a northern high bush and a low bush, the native low bush. They're very good for containers. They don't grow as big, obviously. They have more of a compact growth habit. They only get 1 to 4 feet high, depending on the variety that you use, and 1 to 7 pounds per bush. And you'll notice the names of some of them that I listed here. You'll know you're purchasing a half-high blueberry because they all have names that remind you of something very cold. So that's if you want to put it in containers. Now, the problem with containers, a lot of people do, is they take regular garden soil to put it into a container. That's not a good idea in a container. If you put your garden soil in a container with a blueberry, there is not going to be enough airspace, enough oxygen, that those roots are going to suffocate. So what you want to do is you want to add about 50% aged fine bark, about 40% peat moss, and 10% perlite. This will make a nice, light, fluffy soil mixture for you, even though it's not soil. And it also will have the correct pH for your blueberries to do well. When purchasing your blueberry plants, obviously you're going to want to get the healthiest ones that you can find. It's preferable that you buy in 1 or 2 gallon size containers. These containers will have plants that are usually 2 or 3 years old. Try not to buy one that is only 1 year old. We found that purchasing a 1-year-old plant, once it's transplanted, it just takes it a long time to get healthier. So starting off with a 2 or 3-year-old plant is best. Check to see if your plant is root bound. Now, I know some of the nurseries might frown on this, but if it's possible, pull it out of its container. If the roots are going around in a circle, you're not going to want to buy that plant. You'll want to get a different one. Also, buy a plant that has several shoots coming up, not just 1 or 2, but the more shoots that come up from the soil line of that container, the better it's going to be. Also, you're going to hate me to say this, but find the plant that doesn't have any flowers on it. The first year or 2, you're going to want that blueberry plant to get as healthy as it can. And if it's trying to put on berries, it's going to take all the energy out of the plant and put it on producing fruit. You don't need that. You want a nice healthy blueberry plant. Then after year 2 or 3, it will be so healthy you're going to have tons of berries. When you're planting your blueberry plant, want to plant it in the same depth that it came in the container. Now, most of you home gardeners are probably going to be purchasing your plants in the springtime from a nursery that grows them in containers. If you are planting in the fall, or if you are planting a large amount, and commercial growers, they may be buying bare root berries, but most of you are probably going to be buying it in the container. You want to plant your blueberry plants about 3 to 4 feet apart. We found that that's about the best distance for them to have enough room to grow and have enough air circulation so you don't get diseases and problems like that. Then you're going to want to mulch on top of your blueberry plants. Remember I talked about adding sawdust to the planting before you plant, add it to the soil? That's called an amendment. That is different than a mulch. An amendment is what you put into the soil, and a mulch is what you put on top. You're going to mulch with the same thing that you added as an amendment. In other words, sawdust or bark. That will help keep the pH and even lower the pH a little bit. Then you're going to water your plants in. You're going to prune off all those flower buds. No reason to buy it with flower buds on because you're going to prune them off the first year or 2. Now, it's best if you choose more than one variety. Blueberries are self-fruitful, which means you can buy one plant and you will get blueberries. But if you buy 2 different varieties or more, 3 or 4 varieties, you will get not only more blueberries on your plant, but you will also get larger blueberries on your plant. Mulching helps to suppress the weeds and helps to retain the water. That's why it's a good idea to mulch on top of your blueberry plants. It also helps to keep the roots cool in the summer and warm in the winter. And once again, you're going to be using sawdust or bark, no compost, no manure, and you know why? Because it's high in pH. The first year you plant your blueberries, you're going to put about 2 inches of mulch on top. You're not going to put it right on the crown, but just a little ways away from the crown, about 2 inches. Then you want to increase that, so about 6 years after planting your blueberries, you're going to have a depth of about 6 inches of mulch. Weeding is very important. I guess I should say everything is important for blueberries, but weeds compete for water and nutrients. And what you're going to want to do, the mulch is going to help that a lot. But if you do have weeds popping up around your blueberry plants, you're going to weed them by hand. Blueberries have a lot of what we call feather roots, which are at the top of the soil. And if you have a hand trowel or you're taking a hoe and you're trying to get rid of those weeds, you're probably going to catch them on all of those little feather roots that are up there, and you're going to rip them out. So you don't want to do that. So you want to stay clear of the shallow roots. Try to keep an area of about 4 feet wide area weed-free around your plants. And be very, very careful if you're using herbicides of any kind, especially ones made for woody plants. You're going to want these blueberries to be sprouting up from the ground up. And if you have an herbicide near it, especially one for woody plants, it's really going to inhibit the growth of your blueberry plants. Blueberries need a lot of water, usually more water than people think. 1.5 to 3 inches of water a week during the growing season and any of the time that we're not having our really good rains. You want to water evenly to a depth of about 1/2 foot to a foot. So what you're going to do is you're going to water however you think you need to, and then wait about 6 hours or so, and then dig down, carefully dig down a little bit, see if the water went where it needed to go. Now, it's best, of course, to water from the base because this not only conserves water, but it does help reduce the weeds. So that means drip irrigation or soaker hoses. If some of you really do need to water with an overhead sprinkler, then that's okay. But if you do have to do it that way, water early in the day so that by evening your blueberry plants are dried out. If they go into evening and they go into the coolness of night, the water that's left on your blueberry plants may cause a few diseases. So try to have them dried off by evening. Now, here's one thing that most people forget about. Once you are done harvesting your blueberries, you kind of forget about those plants for a while. And this may be towards the end of summer. But next year's fruit buds are forming at the end of summer. So if you forget to irrigate or you slack off on your watering practices, your plant's not going to like that, and he's not going to produce as many fruit buds. So remember, continue to water until we get our really heavy fall rains, which could be October, November, depending on the year. Now, the picture you see at the bottom of the screen, that's a picture of drought or water stress. You'll notice that sometimes all the leaves turn brown. That plant is not very happy. That plant didn't get the water that it needed. Blueberries cannot, The one thing that blueberries need more than anything else is nitrogen. After you plant your blueberries, really nitrogen is the only nutrient, the only fertilizer they're going to need. If you're going to be using a thin synthetic ammonium sulfate, which is 2100 or 2000, or urea, which is 4600, those two are good to use because they are on the acidic side. Now, make sure you do not use ammonium nitrate. Blueberries do not like nitrate fertilizers, so be cautious of that. You're going to apply those fertilizers in late April, late May, late June. Now, if you're going to use an organic fertilizer, feather meal and blood meal are two really good choices because they are high in nitrogen. But one thing I need to warn you about, even though I told you in late April, late May, and late June, organics take longer to release. They are not going to get to the plant as quickly as a synthetic fertilizer is. So you're going to want to start about a month earlier. The one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to fertilize past the first part of July. If you do, your blueberries are going to put on a lot of new succulent growth, which is going to make it hard when winter comes. So now some of you are probably asking, well, how much am I going to put on? That depends on a lot of things. It depends on how old your plant is, how well your plant did the previous year. The Oregon State University Extension publications, Growing Blueberries in Your Home Garden, give you a lot of information on exactly how much fertilizers to put on specifically. I couldn't go into all that now, so please do refer to those OSU publications. Now, blueberries cannot translocate, which means if you put if you put fertilizer on only one side of the plant, that fertilizer that is not going to translocate to the other side of the plant. So when you fertilize your blueberries, you're going to move the mulch away a little bit. You're going to put the fertilizer in a circle around your plant, water it in really good, and then put the mulch back on. Pollination. Mason bees, bumblebees, and honeybees all pollinate our blueberry plants. Those of you that have mason bees or have mason bee nests in your home are probably even ahead of the game here. And if you're interested in mason bees, I just want to tell you that tomorrow there's another webinar on mason bees through Oregon State 10-minute University noontime chats. But the reason why the mason bees are really good is because our blueberry plants are opening their blossoms up usually around April. And if we happen to have a really cold, wet spring, when our blossoms are open, the bumblebees and the honeybees, they don't like that. They don't like rain, they don't like cool weather, but the mason bees do. They will come out when it's raining a little bit, and they'll come out when the weather's cooler. So if you really want to make sure that your blueberries are pollinated, definitely try having some mason bees in your area. Now, I would say that the majority of blueberry problems are caused because your soil is too high. The soil pH is too high. When the soil pH is too high, a lot of the nutrients, such as iron, cannot be taken up into the plant. This plant here, this poor little plant, has a lot of problems. His main problem is that his soil pH is too high. And you can see what those leaves look like with his Lyme-induced iron deficiency. The other problem this little guy has is look at the weeds, look at the grass underneath. It's competing for what nutrients it is trying to get. So this poor little plant needs to really be taken care of. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the problems you may face with your blueberry plants. Mummyberry is a fungus that's common in the Willamette Valley and southwestern Oregon. This fungus overwinters in the mummified fruit on the ground. So what happens is, well, let me start from the beginning, I guess. You will know that you have mummyberry fungus when your blueberries are starting to turn blue and some of them don't. They look kind of pinkish or tannish. And what happens is these little berries will drop onto the ground and they will form mummies. You can see that in the large picture here. And what happens the following spring, right at the time that your blueberry blossoms are opening up, those mummies that are on the ground are going to open up themselves. They're going to send up all their fungal spores and they are going to reinfect your berries. So sanitation is one of the most important things for keeping the mummyberry fungus away from your blueberry plants. If you can, pick off any mummies you see and discard them. Any you see on the ground, if you possibly can, please pick those up and discard those also. One thing you might want to do in March before your blueberry blossoms are open, if you put new mulch or more mulch on top of around your blueberry plants, you'll hopefully smother some of those mummies. If you're not going to add more mulch that year, then in March before the berry blossoms open up, fluff up the soil a few times during the month of March. This will disturb those little mummies. They will send up their fungal spores, but there won't be any blossoms open to be infected. Blueberry shock virus is a virus that is transmitted from bees as they move from flower to flower. Now, this may seem terrible because what happens is you may lose all of your blossoms and all of your leaves. You may lose it on part of your plant, or you may use your whole plant. And when the shock is over, you will have nothing but bare stems. But trust me, your plant is not dead yet, so don't pull it up, at least not yet. During the summer, the leaves will grow back. So that following winter, if you prune really good, you'll get a lot of new growth. So your plants will recover. It might take them another year or two to start producing the amount of berries you want, but they will recover. One thing you need to know though, this blueberry shock may go from plant to plant. So one year you may have plants that have blueberry shock, the next year another plant may have it, but the plants that have overcome the shock will not get it again. Bacterial blight is a problem that we've been seeing lately. There are a couple cues that will really click in how you know you have bacterial blight. And one is that this blight is only produced on the canes. It only attacks the canes the previous season. So that means only your new canes, the one that grew the previous summer. Also, you will start noticing that you have these water-soaked lesions that appear on the canes around January or February. And then the cankers, they may be only an inch or they may be the whole branch. There are resistant cultivars out there, which that publication that I mentioned before will tell you whether your blueberry plant is resistant to bacterial blight. So in the wintertime, you're going to want to prune out the diseased wood, but you're going to want to avoid winter injury any way you can. Also, that means avoid late season nitrogen fertilizer. Remember I told you, don't plant after July, don't fertilize after July, because if you get nice succulent growth, the winter's cold weather might cause a problem and that will injure the plant, which will make the bacteria come into your plant. Also, if you can, please, if you think your blueberry is susceptible to it, then prune during dry weather, not when the weather is wet. The spotted wing Drosophila is probably the most important pest in blueberry production in Western Oregon. This is a fruit fly, but it's not the kind of fruit fly you're used to seeing. This fruit fly doesn't wait until your fruit and berries are rotting. This female fruit fly has an ovipositor, and while your berries are on the bush getting ready to ripen, she will lay an egg inside of that blueberry or other soft berries too. And that egg will hatch out into a larva, and the larva will start eating on the inside of the berry. You'll know you have this little problem if you go to pick a blueberry and it's soft and squishy, and when you open it up, you'll be able to see either the eggs or the larva inside. You can tell why we call it a spotted wing Drosophila. The males have 2 dots on the top of their wings. This problem came into our area about 2009, and Oregon State University and other universities really got on the ball to figure out how they can help home gardeners take care of this problem. And they've come up with what they call spotted wing Drosophila traps. These are plastic cups with lids with little holes, 3/16 holes drilled around the top and filled with apple cider vinegar. And what this does is this attracts those fruit flies into the trap instead of into your berries. If you go online to Oregon State University or some of the other universities, you will see a lot of information on how to make your spotted wing Drosophila, just your SWD traps, and also all the newest information they have on this problem. Now, I probably have more questions given to me about pruning blueberries than anything else. These are the 2 things you want your blueberries to do. You want to promote growth on strong new wood, and you want to maintain good fruit production. Pruning blueberries is really rather fun. You just need to follow a few simple rules. The first year you're going to plant your plants, you're going to prune off all the flower buds and the flowers when you plant them. And the picture will show you your fruit buds are at the top of the stem and your leaf buds are a little farther down. You're going to want to remove any low, thin, or twiggy growth, and then you're going to cut off the branches at the top of the whips. That will help form laterals. The second winter, you're going to remove some of the flower buds and shape the bush. And if your bush looks really good and it's pretty vigorous, you can let it have a limited crop. But if it still doesn't look like it's doing so well, then you're going to want to prune off all of the flowers. Now, here is a list of how to prune the things that we're going to prune off of a mature blueberry bush. This means after it's 2 or 3 years old. I'm going to go into this in more detail in slides to follow. But I would tell you that your best fruit is produced on 6 to 12 inch long laterals. That means the longer the branch, the better your berries are going to be. I'll just go through these quickly and then we'll go on to the next slide. So from January to early March, you're going to remove any dead and diseased branches, branches that are shorter than your knees, weak branches that'll touch the ground, 1 or 2 of the old unproductive canes, and the twiggy wood at the top, and then you're going to thin out to allow light. Now we're going to go through these step by step. So first, prune out any dead and diseased branches. You'll know, I mean, look at that. You can tell that that branch is dead, right? So that's the first thing you're going to do. Then you're going to cut out the branches that are shorter than your knees, or branches that will reach the ground full of berries. That means these branches grew not very strong, or they grew late in the season, and they are not going to produce the type of good quality berries that you want them to. Then you're going to prune out 1 or 2 of the old unproductive canes. Now, blueberries grow best on 1 to 5 year old wood. That means you're going to want to keep your bush young all the time. And in order to do that, you're going to be pruning out some of the older unproductive canes. You can tell the difference. Just look at this picture. You can tell the old canes by how they look like they've already got bark on them. And you can see some of the newer canes. So you're going to prune out some of the older unproductive ones. That will help stimulate the plant to grow new canes. which will have the best berries. Then you're going to prune out the twiggy wood. You see all those tiny little 1/2 inch to 1 inch little stems? That's what we call twiggy wood. Remember, I told you, the longer the stem, the better the berries. So you're going to prune out all these little ones. You want 6 to 8 to 12 inch long branches with a nice berry bud at the tip. This is a bush before it was pruned. You can see how much is on there. This is what the bush looked like after it was pruned. And here's a side by side. Now you can see that a lot of the twiggy growth is gone. You can see that I've opened it up a little bit to let some air circulation in. You can see that some of the smaller stems at the bottom that were too low down or weak looking have been removed. Now, do you see that real old looking stem that you see from the middle of the plant? I have left that there because it has some new growth on it. But next year, it probably won't have a lot of new growth. So that whole stem, that whole branch will probably come out next year. This is the amount of branches that were pruned out of that one little bush. And that bush was only about 4 years old. Everybody that grows blueberries is going to have a problem with birds. If you are going to use any kind of scare device, you need to put them up before your berries ripen. You can try bird netting, but I warn you, don't throw the netting over your bush, because if you do, once you take that off, it's probably going to hook on the berries and they're going to go flying everywhere. You can try blow up giant eyes or snakes. There's bird scare tape. There's plastic owls. You probably don't want to try distress bird callings. I don't think your neighbors are going to be happy. But the only way to really keep the birds out is to enclose your berry plants in a complete enclosure with netting or wire around it so the birds cannot enter. Now, some of you are saying, I don't think those things all work. And no, they don't always work. Now, a plastic owl looks really cute in the field, but does it really work? You're probably saying no. Well, I got news for you. If you have a cat sitting on top of it, it really does work. So after your blueberries turn blue, try not to pick them right away. Try to wait a few days. They will sweeten up the longer they are on the vine. So that's the end of this presentation. My co-host, Priscilla Robinson, has been answering and looking at the questions that you had in the Q&A. So I do have a couple questions that came in online that I'm going to answer first. And then Priscilla will ask me some of her questions, and I will do the best I can to answer them for you. Charlene had a question. She said that her blueberries were not very sweet, and what can I do to get them sweeter? So there are 3 things you can do, Charlene. Full sun, that's one of the most important. Remember what I said, the more sun a blueberry gets, the sweeter the berries are going to be. The second thing is varieties. Varieties do taste different. You might want to go to a You Pick Blueberry place and test out some of the different varieties to see which ones you like, see which ones are the sweetest ones for you. And also, like I just mentioned, let them ripen on the vine just a little bit longer. Lydia has a problem. She had some issues with her blueberries and said that some of the branches didn't put on any leaves. I'm not sure what that problem is, but if you go to metromastergardeners.org, you can ask that information. You can send in photos. You can give a lot of details, and the Master Gardeners will be able to answer your questions. But what she wanted to know is if she does have a disease and she's pruning in the wintertime, is she going to need to sanitize her pruning tools between bushes? And yes, if you have problems that you think is a disease problem in your bush, do sanitize them in between bushes. But if your bushes are healthy, there's no need really to sanitize. And to sanitize your tools, please use, the recommendation is 1 part bleach, 10 parts water. All right, and Haley had a problem that I think I probably covered in this presentation, and that is she has some blueberry bushes that are underneath some trees, so they're not getting much sun, and there also has a lot of grass underneath, and she wanted to know if she should transplant them. Blueberries transplant very easy. They're really good transplanting. Most of the time we transplant in the fall. in October or November. If she said her blueberries were very young, and it sounds like they're not in a good place at all. So if she needs to transplant them in the spring, she can. But the problem is they need to make sure, she needs to make sure that they go to a place that they want to be in. She needs to make sure that the pH is right and that she has enough organic matter in her soil to plant those. So those are the questions I had off the internet. So Priscilla, if you want to ask me some, I will try to answer them.
You bet. Well, that was a great presentation. And every time I listen to you, I hear something new. There was a lot of questions on mulch. I know that you talked about using a mature Doug fir mulch, but people had questions whether they could sheet mulch or if they could use the cocoa or straw. What is the science behind those items?
Okay, sheet mulching, are you talking, if they're talking about like a weed barrier, probably.
That's what I think I heard.
Okay, definitely no on the weed barrier, because you want these blueberry plants to send up new shoots from the bottom up, and that weed barrier is going to inhibit the new growth coming up. So weed barriers are definitely out. The straw is going to have, even though it is straw and not hay, it will still have a lot of seeds in it, so it's probably not going to be your best choice. The chore, I have to say that I do not know the pH of it. I would have to find out the pH first to find out whether that would be a viable option. Sorry, I can't answer that completely.
Okay. There was a question about fertilizing, and you talked about and you showed in the video how to fertilize when they're in the ground. What would be the practice if you've got them in, say, a half barrel, like a nice big planter?
It would be the same as it would be the same. You would still fertilize the same way in a container, but you would need to look up that information from Oregon State University to find out exactly how much you want to put into the.
Okay.
And how much you fertilize each time.
And along that same line, are there any pet-friendly fertilizers that people can put down? I know that my dog, as soon as there's fertilizer down, she wants to have her nose and tongue in it. So any hints on that? There were a couple questions about that.
Yeah, definitely the synthetic fertilizers are not going to be good for pets. So you really have to be careful if you're using a synthetic fertilizer. Some of the organic ones may be okay. Priscilla, I think you might be able to even answer this better than me. One thing, you definitely try to keep your pets away. And once you water in a fertilizer, and especially if it's a granulated fertilizer, as soon as you can't see those granules anymore, then the fertilizer is usually down deep enough into the soil where it won't cause a problem on pets.
All right. Let's see. There was a question about companion planting. Someone said they had a pink lemonade plant. And are there blueberry plants that you recommend going along with especially for pollination? Any experience on that?
A pink blueberry plant. Yeah, it's called pink lemonade. It is a blueberry plant, but it is I believe it's a rabbit eye. It's either a rabbit eye or a low bush. And it will not produce as many blueberries as your regular blue ones will. It's kind of a fun one, and it's a great one to put into a container. But it is a blueberry plant, so you can use the same sort of pruning and fertilizing and watering practices that you would do with a blue high bush blueberry.
All righty. Nathan wants to know, where does one find aged bark for a container mix? Would it be at a local nursery? Maybe yeah.
Okay. Sometimes if you call the places that have the large places that sell bark and sawdust, you'll need to ask them whether it's aged or not. Now, some of the time also, if you only have 1 or 2 plants, you can probably buy them in a bag at a farm store or a nursery. But if you have a lot more, you're going to want to go to a a bark place that sells bark in large quantities, but you'll need to ask them how old it is and is it aged.
You're talking of like a landscaping place where you would buy other types of mulch?
Yes,
Okay. All right. Someone said,
yes.
Marilee has 43-year-old blueberry plants, and they're still producing fairly well. When should she start to think about replacing them? And she should do it all
She
at
doesn't need
once?
to replace them. All she needs to do, oh, go ahead.
No, good.
Okay, my internet connection is a little bad here. I didn't quite get all of that, but I think the answer that she wants is she does not have to take them out. Blueberries can live 50 years longer. They can live to be 100 years if they need to be. But what she wants to do is rejuvenate them every year. Start cutting out every year, cut out some of the older canes. Like maybe this winter, if she hasn't done it yet, she can prune out 2 or 3 of the older canes that don't look like they are producing much. Next year, cut out another older one. The harder you prune a blueberry plant, the more new growth you're going to get.
All right. So Wendy wants to know about pruning and about the shoots that are coming up. Can you just give guidelines on what shoots do you keep? What shoots do you cut off at the ground level?
Okay. If it's winter time and you're getting ready to prune, if it's a very short shoot, shorter than your knees, that's the ones you're going to want to prune off. If they are very, very small and spindly, like smaller than a pencil, those aren't going to be very strong. Those are probably the ones you're going to want to cut off. Otherwise, you're going to leave those nice long shoots, and they're going to produce laterals the next year and produce a lot more berries.
All right. I know people are really anxious to get their their blueberry bushes really getting vibrant this season. Someone says, I have bushes that have been in the ground a couple years and still small. Should I prune off the buds this year to get energy into the growth rather than the berries?
Yeah, perfect. That's exactly the right answer. If they're not looking that healthy, get rid of the berries. It takes a lot of energy to produce fruit, and your weak berry bushes are going to suffer if they have to put all the energy into the fruit and not into the plant itself. Good
Okay,
answer.
and pruning the low bush varieties, is it pretty much the same as the northern high bush ones?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same because they all produce on new wood. The newer the wood, 1 to 5 year old wood. So you're still going to want to get rid of that small twiggy stuff. You're going to want to try to encourage longer shoots, and those are the ones that you're going to want to keep because they will have the best berries.
Right. All right. About some particulars, people wanted to get more information about particular varieties. I loved your idea about going to a U-pick, but specifically Berkeley, Coville, and Brigada. These are ones that I'm not familiar with.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the last 2 that you mentioned, but Berkeley is a very old variety, and unfortunately, it is very susceptible to a lot of diseases. So if you do come across a Berkeley, and you will see if you go online and get that blueberry cultivars for the Pacific Northwest, you will see that it definitely says they are not the best ones to have right now. I can't tell exactly about the other 2, and a lot of it is people's preference, but definitely look on that blueberry cultivars for the Pacific Northwest, and it will give you lots of information you want about specific blueberry bushes.
All right. Judy is asking us about blueberries that have been in pots for about 6 years. They're not very big. They're not very robust. They're not making much fruit. Should she take them out of the pots and start again? Or maybe should she test the soil and do some of the cultural things that you've talked about? What are her options?
Okay, it's definitely her decision. She can either do that, she can either test the soil, she can either pull it out, see if they're root bound, or if she wants to put it in the ground, fall is the best time to do that. So I would wait until October, November to transplant it out. But if she does want to keep it in, she can take it out, check the roots, even do a little bit of root pruning. That is something we do when we transplant from one plant that's a little bit of root bound into another container. She might do a little bit of root pruning, and then definitely add in the amount of bark and peat moss and perlite that I suggested on a container, and to put it back in if she does want to keep it in that container.
Okay. And now there's a lot of questions coming in on the pH. Now, I think people are missing the spring garden fair and our, spring into gardening, because we used to do free testing then. What are people in, say, our Willamette Valley options for testing? And one person recommends, does the home kit that you can buy in the garden centers work?
Yeah, the home kits might not be as quite as perfect as what the Clackamas County Master Gardeners do when we're allowed to do our soil pH testing, but it's still close enough. So you can buy those over-the-counter kits. But I would suggest that you try a couple different types of kits and to see if they come about close in the same pH range. And then if they're a little bit different, kind of go into the middle. If you do want to pay, you can send your soil into a laboratory, an analytical laboratory that tests soil pH, if you want to test it that way. But home kits, they will do okay. They kind of get you in the ballpark.
Great. And I think there's still a little bit of confusion about the effects that compost have on soil pH. Can you just go over that again, please?
Okay. Yeah, most of the time compost is high in pH. In other words, it's usually, 6.5, sometimes 7, depending on what materials were used to make that compost. And that's why it's not good to use it, because it will not lower the pH. It will increase the pH in your soil.
Okay. So we want a low pH in the 4 to 5 range, and those ones are not going to lower it. Yep. Okay.
Correct. 4.5 to 5.5. Yes.
Right. Sarah wants to know, is blueberry mulch safe to use? I'm not sure what she's asking there, but do you have an idea?
I am not sure either, unless she's probably talking about maybe they chopped up and mulched up their cuttings from their blueberry plants. And if that's so, she probably could use that. Yes, because the blueberry plant itself would have a low pH. Yes, if that's what she's talking about.
Okay. When do you know a blueberry plant is established? What are the signs that your plant is happy?
Is maturing, right?
Maturing, yeah.
Usually, if you buy they normally say that a mature bush is somewhere between 6 and 8 years old. That's what we consider a mature blueberry bush. If you buy a 3-year-old bush and you put it in the ground, 2 years later, it's going to be 5 years old. So it's getting really close to maturity. So it would depend on whether you buy a 1, 2, or 3-year-old plant at the time you put it in the ground. I hope that answers the question.
I hope it does too. But it's for new homeowners that they move in, they've got blueberry bushes, they don't know when they were planted, so I guess they're trying to figure that out.
I see. Yeah, you'll be able to tell. There's actually a way to tell. 1-year-old stem is usually nice and red or yellow, depending on your branch. It looks nice and clean. Then you get a 2 or 3-year-old branch and they look a little bit spotty. They don't look quite as clean and smooth. They look a little bit spotty. Then when you get into your 4 and 5-year-old branches, they're starting to put on what looks like bark. So that might be a good indication for a person that isn't sure how old their plant is.
Okay. And someone, Tina mentions, I need to pull bushes that raspberry vines have rooted under. You're good with raspberry bushes too. Have any hints for this person, for Tina?
Okay, they want to pull the raspberries out. They want to leave the blueberries in and get rid of the raspberries. Is that it?
I'm guessing. Yeah, those canes.
carefully, very carefully, because you're going to be disturbing some of the feather roots on your blueberry plants as you remove the raspberries. So you're going to try to have to do it very carefully. You're not going to want to use an herbicide to do it, or that might hurt the blueberries at the same time. So,
And pine needles, one person wants to know, can I add pine needles and leave those on the blueberry bushes?
yeah, as a mulch, go ahead. You might not want to use them so much as an amendment because it takes them longer to break down in the soil, but as a mulch, they are fine to use as mulch.
Okay. And Joan wants to know, she didn't plant her, well, she knows she didn't plant her blueberry bushes properly. Now that she's been listening to you, should she replant them to try and improve and amend the soil, or what are her options?
You're right. She has those two options, and it's going to be her preference. Either she can leave them there and try to amend the soil a little bit, try to do better pruning, or if she really thinks that she has a better spot for them, then I would get the new spot ready to go for fall and then transplant them there. It's going to be hard if it's in a really bad spot and they haven't been taken care of. It's going to be hard to get them healthy again. So she might want to get ready to move them, but it is your choice. You do have those two choices.
And here's a real specific question. I don't know this, but do you know what the pH of worm castings are? Is that something you want to be adding to your blueberry bushes?
I do not know. I don't. In my, I think it's too high, but I do not know for sure. I'd have to look that up.
Okay. And I heard you talk earlier about being careful with oak wood
Walnut.
chips, sawdust, because of the
Walnut.
tannins. Is there anything that you can do to
Oh, I
season it so that it's better off, or just stay away from it?
I would just stay away from it. Why make a problem?
All right. We've had a lot of great questions come in, and people are mentioning that they really have learned some new things. So thanks so much. Let's see, Wendy wants to know about heavy soil. Is mulching the best way to help this soil?
Amending the soil is the best way. Putting in organic matter, the sawdust or bark in with the soil. That's the best way to get it fluffier and not be so heavy. The mulch is just going to sit on top of the soil, but the amendment you're adding into the soil. So you're going to need to add that amendment into it. If you're using blueberries, of course, like I mentioned, sawdust or bark so that it will keep the pH low.
All right. Okay. So I guess, with all the trees that got knocked down in this last storm, people have a lot of wood chips around. What about cherry tree wood chips?
Yeah, that should be fine. Yeah, you're right. People are going to have a lot of those around now. The problem, you're not going to want to add it fresh if you're adding it as an amendment. And if you do use it as a mulch on top, be aware that when you put fresh mulch or fresh bark or sawdust on top of the soil, that also will, as it breaks down, it's using nitrogen. So you're going to probably have to add more fertilizer than you normally would because the fresh sawdust or mulch is taking up nitrogen that your plant needs.
All right. There were some questions about containers because, not everyone has the yard or the sunny spot in their yard. So they want to put them in containers. And they were wondering about some particular types of pots. What are they called? Self-watering pots, like earth boxes or glow pear boxes. The self-watering ones that have the well inside. How do blueberry bushes do with that?
I do not have any experience with those. I would imagine if they work the proper way that they are supposed to work and they are getting the water to the plant. Now, are these watering from the bottom or are they watering?
They're
from
watering from the bottom. Well,
Okay.
some of them have a whole, it's
system?
kind of like a pot inside a pot.
Right. Remember, blueberries have a lot of feather roots at the top. Those are ones that are also going to need water. So even if you're using that type of container, you are make sure that you do water from the top also. And don't let the roots be setting in water.
Yeah, that sounds like a good answer. Thanks. That's good. Just review again, when should people be pruning their blueberry bushes?
January to March. You want to prune them before your berry blossoms open up, which is usually the end of March, the first part of April, depending on the weather.
Yeah. And someone has a nice bed that used to hold rose bushes. Would this be a good spot for blueberries?
Only if they amend the soil and only if they check the pH. Their rose pH in their soil where their roses are is probably going to be pretty high. So just planting them right away isn't going to be helpful. You're going to have to make sure that the soil pH is correct and you have the right amount of organic matter in the soil.
Okay. And someone says they have alpaca manure. Can they add that to their,
No,
I think manure is a no-no.
Yeah, manures are high in salt and usually high in pH too, but also the salt is a bad thing for the blueberries.
Okay, let me scroll down. Can you use azalea and rhododendron fertilizer for rose bushes?
You mean
For blueberry bushes,
Yeah.
sorry.
You can, but they have phosphorus and potassium in it, which the blueberries really don't need. If you are going to use a complete fertilizer, like a rhododendron fertilizer, you could use that the first year, but after that, they really need just the nitrogen. And I do want to caution people that if you are going to use a complete fertilizer, most complete fertilizers have the nitrate form of ammonium in them and not the sulfate form. And like I said, blueberries do not like the nitrate form of fertilizers.
And one of our other master gardeners who is familiar with earth boxes, thanks Sean, says that the earth box is not going to be deep enough for blueberries. So
Okay.
that's
Good
an
answer.
answer.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
I
And
think we have only time for one more question.
Okay, here's the last one. I moved into a house with very young blueberry plants in the backyard. They're planted right in the yard, surrounded by grass, and I'm wondering if the grass is a problem. What should I do?
Definitely the grass is a problem. Remove the grass carefully, take it out with your hands if you can, get rid of as much of that grass you can, put on mulch, put on a nice couple inches layer of mulch to help suppress the grass and the other weeds that are going to grow up there. And I also want to remind people, if they have more questions or you have problems with your blueberries, please go to metromastergardeners.org. You can fill out a form, you can put in pictures, you can tell us what your problems is, and we'll be glad to answer your questions.
Okay, and I just pasted that in our chat box, so people can just grab that link right from there. Wow, it's been a really great presentation. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed that, Jane.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Bye.
Bye-bye.